Dave Lilland. The story of a hero. To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving peace. George Washington. You will notice that Dave Lilland is in a different country fighting for his life and for the people of that country, but he still does it. That is what makes him great. That is what makes him the person he is today. You'll realize it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what you're doing. All that matters is if you're doing something to help. That's what he did. He decided that instead of waiting for a draft or running to another country like other people do, especially in our times of need, he would just go ahead and fight. That's why he enlisted. He enlisted in the army, just like his family, so that he could help make our country great. He could help protect our freedoms. That's what he did. This story is a story of one man's willingness to fight for his country and for those in need. It's a tale of one person who put himself, themselves, herself out there to save millions of countless lives. That's what he did. He wanted to help, and he wanted to help. That to me, that to us, is the best thing you can do to help us. It doesn't matter if you're poor, rich. You shouldn't act a certain way just because of your standard of living. And he understood that. He knew that in order to help our country, he had to be prepared to risk his life, go into other places, help other people, even though it meant there's a chance, 50, 60, 100% chance that he was gonna die. And he understood that. That is who we're gonna talk about today. Dave Lilland is a hero. He risked his life to save millions upon billions of others just so they could have the freedom we have. Most of Dave Lilland's family went into the military. Most of them went into it. It was what their family did. And his mother and his father both served in the military. And as a child, he didn't really get to see them, but he still envied them and wanted to be like them so that he could help others around him. He went into the military out of choice, so in that conversation, he was not drafted. And he chose. Freedom was very important to him, as it should be to all of us. Dave Lilland fought with his life to protect those in Vietnam and to help them regain their freedoms. He started out as just a patrol officer on the borders of New Mexico. And when the Vietnam War came around, it was under President Kennedy. And he chose to serve instead of having to be drafted and running away from his country instead of fighting with them to help another. That's the difference. Instead of being drafted, he chose, like his other family, to go into it. That was his lifelong dream, and that is what made him make that choice. That was his impact. That was the biggest part of the story. He never really wanted to just go into a normal profession, such as a plumber, a scientist, or anything like that. All he ever wanted as he was growing up was to be in the military. So, right out of high school, there he was. As I said before, you will notice that Dave Lilland is in a different country fighting for his life and for the people there. But he still does it. You will notice and realize that it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. All that matters is what you're doing to help. And Dave Lilland understood that. As we said in the beginning, to be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving peace. George Washington. Now, as you know, George Washington was not the president at that time, but he was the first one we ever had. And from that humble beginning, he realized that just because there's war doesn't mean you can't be prepared. And even if you have to go through it, you can still help preserve peace. And that's what we did. That's what he did. If you guys don't understand that, I don't know what else to say. Because he understood why it was important that he fought. Why it was important that him was the one who went out. That's what was important to him. Thank you.
You said you didn't like that one.
President John F. Kennedy was reluctant to have the U.S. enter the Vietnam War because he didn't want to risk that many Americans' lives to a cause he wasn't sure he agreed with. The choice that was now confronting the president appeared to be between committing troops or enduring outright defeat. Despite its former U.S. training, the Army of the South Vietnamese was ill-prepared to combat the uprising of the North. They were not well adapted to fighting in the swamps and jungles. Many of the South's leaders were incompetent or corrupt. As the Viet Cong grew stronger, the U.S. government expanded its involvement in South Vietnam, starting in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy. Meanwhile, the Viet Cong uprising seemed increasingly likely to succeed. Believing that victory was near, the North Vietnamese began sending more army troops to fight in the South in April of 1964. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963. By that time, about 16,000 U.S. soldiers have been sent to the Vietnam as military advisors and workers. They were working hard to help the South Vietnamese succeed in this war and to reclaim their homeland. The Viet Cong were trained and armed by North Vietnam. The North infiltrated supplies and personnel into the South via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This system of mountain and jungle paths and later modern roads led through Laos and Cambodia to South Vietnam. The government of South Vietnam received military equipment, financial aid, and training from the United States. The U.S. joined the Vietnam War in 1965, just after the North started committing more troops. But by the middle of the 1960s, it was apparent that the South Vietnamese Army and security forces could not cope with the new threat that rose to challenge the training from the U.S. North Vietnam had a communist government. It sought to unify the country under a single communist regime, modeled after those of the Soviet Union and China. On the other side, the anti-communist government of South Vietnam fought to keep Vietnam more closely aligned with the West. Initially, the Viet Cong, the guerrillas, trained by North Vietnam, fought South Vietnamese forces. The Viet Cong were later joined by the Army of North Vietnam. But in the middle of all this chaos, there is Dave Lilland, an Army officer who joined in 1955. Dave Lilland was born in 1938 in Slater, Iowa. He joined the Army in 1955. Dave went to Camp Chaffee in Arkansas. Once he finished military school and boot camp, he went to the border of New Mexico to keep out illegal immigrants. He did that for about 2 years before he went to Vietnam and served until 1975, when he retired as a sergeant first class.